You've seen the movie. One soldier charges into the enemy line so the rest of the team can escape. You called it heroic, dramatic, the stuff of fiction. Then there's this ant, no brain, no plan, no fear, doing the exact same thing, but messier. Which ant species literally explodes on command? Is it being controlled or does it choose this? What actually comes out when it bursts? And why did dozens of completely unrelated species separated by millions of years and thousands of miles all independently invent the exact same trick? The answer involves a gland the size of a grain of rice that takes up most of the ant's body, and a decision that happens faster than you can blink. The ant is called Camponotus saundersi, and it lives across Southeast Asia. It looks ordinary at first glance, small, dark, unremarkable, something you'd step on without a second thought. But inside its body, running almost the full length of its abdomen, are two massively enlarged glands packed with a toxic, sticky fluid. When the ant squeezes its body muscles hard enough, those glands burst open. The fluid explodes outward in every direction, coating whatever is nearby in a sticky, corrosive spray. The ant dies instantly. Whatever it was fighting usually dies too, or gets so stuck and damaged that it stops being a threat entirely. This isn't a malfunction, it isn't a last desperate accident, it's the whole point. But here's the weird part. This isn't even the most extreme version of the behavior, not by a long shot. Most people hear exploding ant and picture a cornered creature, something desperate, backed into a wall, no escape, body giving out under pressure. That picture feels natural because we project human emotions onto everything we see. Sacrifice feels emotional, reluctant, tragic, a last resort. But that picture is completely wrong. In real observed colonies, Camponotus saundersi workers don't wait to get cornered. They move toward threats. They close the distance on purpose. They position themselves. The ant isn't being attacked into exploding. It's deploying itself as a weapon with intent. And here's the detail that should make you stop. These glands are so large, they physically crowd out space that other organs would normally use. These ants are measurably worse at hunting and foraging than regular workers in the same colony. But they carry less food. They're slower builders. They were built for this single role from the moment they hatched. The colony didn't lose a soldier when one of these ants dies. It fired a preloaded missile it had been storing since birth. But that's not even the wild part. What's actually inside the spray changes everything you think you know about how small creatures fight. The fluid isn't just toxic, it's sticky and corrosive at the same time, engineered to physically glue attackers in place while also burning and damaging them chemically, simultaneously. Think of it like getting hit with super glue and acid at the same moment across your entire body. The spray contains compounds called acetates that irritate and lock up the muscles of whatever gets coated. Effective against rival ants, small insects, and even larger creatures like beetles and centipedes that outweigh the exploding ant by a factor of 10 or more. Scale the blast radius to human size, and it's the rough equivalent of a person projecting fluid more than 30 feet outward in every direction all at once. The muscle squeeze that causes the rupture is so violent and so total that it physically cannot be undone. Once that signal fires, the sequence completes. Yes, there's no partial explosion, no undo button, no survival. But here's where it gets crazy. Some researchers have documented that the ant can delay the explosion for a short window before it fires. It doesn't always go off instantly on contact. Sometimes it waits, repositions, gets closer to the center of the threat, then fires. This is the part everyone misses. It's not a blind panic reflex, it's closer to aiming. A creature with no conscious brain running what looks like a targeting sequence. Now compare this to a bee sting, because most people lump these two things together as basically the same kind of sacrifice. They are not even close to the same thing. When a honeybee stings you and dies, that death is an accident. The barbed stinger gets stuck in your skin, and when the bee tries to pull away, its abdomen tears apart. The bee did not evolve to die. It evolved a stinger for repeated defense, and the dying is an unintended side effect of how that stinger happens to be shaped against thick mammal skin. One organism dies because of a design quirk it never chose. The exploding ant is a completely different category. The ant evolved specifically so that its death is the weapon itself. The dying isn't a side effect, it's the primary function. Same outcome on the surface: dead insect, damaged threat, but completely opposite logic underneath. The bee's death is a flaw that became tolerable over time. The ant's death is a feature that became essential, and that difference tells you something important. Evolution doesn't care how something gets done, only whether it works. Both paths led to the same result, through entirely different routes for entirely different reasons. Somewhere in a dense Borneo rainforest, roughly 40 million years ago, a colony stumbled onto a mutation by pure chance. One worker hatched with slightly larger glands than the others. It wasn't stronger, it wasn't faster. It was in most ways a slightly worse ant than its nestmates. But when it died during a fight, when those swollen glands finally ruptured, the fluid that sprayed out coated the enemy and stopped the attack cold. More nestmates survived that day than would have otherwise. Those nestmates reproduced. Their offspring inherited the mutation. Slowly, over thousands of generations, the colony that had accidentally built a living grenade started outcompeting every colony that hadn't figured it out yet. Scientists didn't formally describe and name this behavior until the 1970s. But the ants had been running this same calculation for tens of millions of years before any human ever watched it happen. And when researchers started looking more carefully at other species, they found the same behavior in Colobopsis, in Crematogaster, in completely separate ant families on different continents, each one arriving at the identical answer entirely on its own. The same math, the same weapon, rebuilt from scratch over and over across millions of years of total isolation. The explosion isn't some bizarre accident of evolution. Given the right colony structure and the right environmental pressure, nature builds this weapon every single time the numbers add up. And once you see the logic, you start finding it everywhere you look. Certain termite species have soldiers that rupture glands full of toxic slime to defend their tunnels. Same core mechanism, different chemistry, completely different branch of the family tree. Pea aphids explode to coat predators in a sticky substance that repels further attacks and protects the rest of the group nearby. Inside your own body right now, white blood cells called neutrophils, your immune system's frontline fighters, release their own DNA as a physical sticky net to trap and hold bacteria in place, then die immediately after. That is not a metaphor or a loose comparison. That is literally the ant thing happening in your bloodstream every time you fight off an infection. The pus from an infected cut, mostly the bodies of dead immune cells that burned themselves out fighting so the rest of you could survive. Slime mold colonies, which aren't animals at all but organize almost like one, have individual cells that sacrifice themselves completely to build a rigid stalk that lifts reproductive cells high enough off the ground to release spores into moving air. They die so the spores can travel farther. Salmon die in the river after spawning, and their decomposing bodies release nutrients that feed the exact stream ecosystem their offspring will grow up depending on. The sandbox tree, called Hura crepitans, violently explodes its seed pods to scatter seeds across a wide area, destroying the pod entirely in the process. Some plant cells deliberately trigger their own death during drought to seal off damaged sections and stop water from leaking out, sacrificing part of the structure to protect the whole. The dead man's switch in engineering used in trains and industrial machines was designed on this exact logic. If the operator goes down, the defense still fires automatically. You have almost certainly been kept alive at least once by cells doing the ant thing inside your own body at this very moment, but you had no idea it was happening. The exploding ant isn't a freak of nature reserved for strange corners of the rainforest. It's the most visible, most dramatic version of a strategy that biology uses constantly. The only difference is that with this ant, you can actually watch the whole thing happen in real time. There is a real limit here, though, and it matters. This behavior, called autothysis, meaning the ant deliberately ruptures its own body, only makes strategic sense when the colony is large enough to absorb the loss without collapsing. In a small or newly established colony, losing even one worker to a minor skirmish is genuinely expensive. The math flips entirely. Therefore, younger Camponotus saundersi colonies show this behavior far less frequently. They hold their exploders in reserve for serious, existential threats rather than routine border conflicts. The spray radius is also physically limited. It's a close-range weapon, not a deterrent you can project from a safe distance. The ant has to close in on something that is actively trying to kill it before the blast radius becomes useful, which means the ant is running toward danger on purpose. Researchers also still debate exactly how much real control the ant has over the timing of the rupture. The waiting to aim behavior is documented on video in intact colonies, but whether that represents any form of behavioral decision-making or is simply a chemical delay built into the trigger mechanism hasn't been fully resolved. One reading of the evidence says there's genuine behavioral control, another says it's purely mechanical. The honest answer right now is that the science is still catching up to the ant. The creature you were about to step on without thinking might be a precision weapon, mid-deployment, running survival arithmetic your brain couldn't process in time. That's not horror, that's 40 million years of engineering, and the colony that figured it out first is still here.